You know, with all the excitement of the launch of the Reaper Destroyer silver foil ash can yesterday, I forgot to talk about Image Comics turning 30 years old. 30 years of one of my absolute biggest inspirations. So let's absolutely talk about it. Welcome back to another JMS Talks. I am your host, very sexy, very distinguished, very talented, always narcissistic, but never vain, staunch defender of Rob Liefeld, and Gina Carano, and a lover of all things 90s. Joseph Michael Sontag, or Joam Sontag if you prefer, or as the Pope likes to call me, JMS. Welcome to the show, and today we are talking about 30 years. 30 years of Image Comics, right? This was something that rocked the comic book world. And if you are around my age, which, I'm pushing 40 here, people. I know I don't look like it. I know the sexy mug does not look like it's about to be 40 years old, but it's true. It is. I was around for the birth of Image Comics. Now, I wasn't there from the very, very beginning, granted, because I was 10 years old when Image launched in 92. But I was there. I knew what was going on. I saw it, blah, blah, blah. And it completely changed my comic book world. It changed what I wanted to do as a kid. I went from liking comic books and liking to draw to wanting to be a creator. My dream was to work at Image Comics. I wanted to work at Extreme Studios or Top Cow or Wildstorm. It didn't matter. I wanted to work in that building, or at least, at the time I thought they were all in the same building. Like a child's brain, I didn't comprehend that they were, all across the country in different areas, but I wanted to be an artist for Image Comics. I wanted to have my character. I always wanted to have my character with that image eye in the corner. That was always a dream of mine when I was younger. So what is Image Comics? If you are new to comics or comic collecting or whatever, maybe you weren't around for when this happened, but so at Marvel Comics, for a long time, Marvel bred some of the best artists in the 80s, early 90s, and you had guys that were coming up. Todd McFarlane, Rob Liefeld, Jim Lee were by far the three biggest names in the industry at the time. Two of them working on X-Books with Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld, and Todd McFarlane working on Amazing Spider-Man and Spider-Man. Now, these guys would revolutionize the way the comics were drawn at the time, playing off of all of their influences to that point. And this isn't to cast shade on any of the guys that came before him, the Burns, the Perez's, all those guys, fantastic artists. They built up the history of comics going all the way back to Jack Kirby, So this has nothing to do with who's the greatest, blah, blah, blah. It's just at the moment in time in the late 80s and early 90s, they were able to capture the zeitgeist of the country, of the world, of the comic book world. The late 80s and early 90s was an explosion of ideas and experimental structure when it came to a lot of things: music, movies, comic books, just entertainment in general. And these guys really tapped into that. They brought a lot of influences over from manga, however you pronounce that, anime with tech. You all know talking to Dan Fraga and Marat Michaels, Appleseed. The anime Appleseed was a big influence on a lot of tech. Willis Portacio, I always say his name wrong. Willis Portacio brought a lot of that, kind of tech vibe into his art, and a lot of the guys fed from Willis, especially when it came to a lot of his style with his bounce lighting and how he lit characters and his crosshatch and stuff like that. A lot of guys took that and put it into their own work. Jim Lee being a big one, working with Scott Williams, took a lot of that into his work. So they brought a lot of energy and stuff that was used in comics, but not to the extent where they were doing it at that point in time. A lot of speed lines, everything was a little bit more action-based. Panels were being broken. There were bigger, splashier pages, in-your-face action, stuff that really tapped into the comic book reader at the time, myself, included. I remember that was right about the time I was getting into comics, so I was getting into it at this explosion out of what had been kind of the norm coming up to that point. Just the normal way of grid panels. If you read comics, you know what I'm talking about. Where panels were you get 6 to 9 panels, grid panels in a page, and it just read good. Storytelling was fine, but once they started like opening that up a little bit more, giving the pages room to breathe, feeding a little bit of their ego because they wanted to draw bigger, draw more in your face stuff, and they did. It brought in a whole new reader. It excited the younger readers. It gave a little bit of a shot of energy into the entire industry as a whole. So what happened? So these guys got extremely popular, right? And they sold millions of copies of books from Marvel, brought in a ton of money, and they weren't getting paid a lot. I mean, let's backtrack. They were getting paid a lot, all right? For back then. I mean, royalty rights and everything. Like, these guys were making a lot of money. Mark Silvestri was living at a beach house right off the ocean, driving like sports cars, Ferraris, or whatever like that. He was making a lot of money off of the royalties of Uncanny X-Men when he was drawing it. So let me take, they were making money. The problem is that they didn't have all the rights to the characters they would create. If you look at guys like Rob Liefeld, created a ton of characters for Marvel, and yes, he got the royalties off them, but they weren't his characters anymore. You make it in the machine, it stays the machine's property. Rob doesn't own Cable and Deadpool and Domino and all these characters that he created for X-Force. He doesn't own them. Those are Marvel's, and they'll always be Marvel. They wanted to kind of break away from that and do something that was their own. Rob Liefeld, specifically just wanted to do something that was different, that didn't have anybody breathing over his shoulder, and he went out to do his own book called The Executioners. There was a heavy emphasis on the X, and that drew the ire of Marvel, and he kind of got chastised for that. But there was a lot of things where Todd McFarlane was fed up with scripts. He had different issues of why he was upset with Marvel and wanted to do different things. They banded together. So you had Rob, you had Todd, Jim Valentino, and Eric Larson. They were the four guys that originally started talking about doing something on their own, and they eventually brought in the big names of Jim Lee, Mark Silvestri. Wills was a part of it. Originally, he was going to be an Image founder. Unfortunately, his sister passed away during that time, so he kind of pulled back from being a partner in Image. But the biggest names in the industry saw that they were the ones being followed by the fans. It was their names that people were coming in, and it was selling books. It was not necessarily the characters, not necessarily the writers. It was their art, their visuals, their images, that was drawing these new readers in. And they were selling millions and millions of copies. X-Men 1 by Jim Lee sold like 8 million copies. I think X-Force 1 by Rob Liefeld sold like, 5 million or something like that. Spider-Man 1 sold millions of copies as well. That was star power, right? They were the rock stars of that industry at the time, and they were just bold enough to say, like, we're going to do this on our own. So they set out to do it. They decided to leave Marvel and start their own thing, and nobody believed in them, at least in the industry. I'm sure the fans did. And the fans are just excited, like, we want to see what these guys are going to do. And when they did, man, did it drop. Oh, man, did it explode. Starting with Youngblood 1, when that came out, followed by Spawn 1. I mean, guys, if you were around at that time, you know what it was like to get these brand new books from this new company called Image Comics. And that eye looks so awesome, right? And maybe I'm biased, but there was just something about that Image eye on that comic that just looked cool and new and fresh. And these were new characters. The characters they were creating were brand new characters you could get in on at the beginning of their creation. You didn't have these decades of history that you had to go back and find all these back issues. You were there from the beginning, seeing these characters unfold, and it's cool new characters. Spawn, Youngblood, Wildcats. Inspired art. If you go back and see some of my appreciating comic book art videos that I've done over the last couple of years, I talk about the inspired art that I see in those early issues of Image, because that's like, for the first time, free of the shackles of Marvel, right? Doing their own thing. I mean, the motivation, the inspiration that they had, the excitement to put that out there. And also there was a sense of, like, you want to show that you can do this, like there was, maybe a little bit of cockiness in that art, and you can see it. Wildcats 1, Spawn 1, Youngblood 1, Savage Dragon 1 was awesome. As much as I don't like Eric Larson to this day for various reasons, that Savage Dragon #1 was a beautifully drawn book. All those Image #1 books that dropped, were awesome. If I see them in a bin today for whatever, I'm buying it. I've got so many of those copies laying around because I'll just Cyberforce one. Man, Mark Silvestri started breaking out, and he was doing awesome working on Uncanny X-Men and then Wolverine. But then he really came into his own with Cyberforce, and you just saw that maturation of a guy that was already at the top of illustrator of his time, right? And he just kept getting better and better and better with everything that he did. The inkers that he would bring in and work with, Bat and Joe Weems and like all those guys. And then you would go on to the Darkness and just, oh man, guys, I'm telling you, it's so exciting to me. This was such an inspirational period in my life. Just going back and thinking about it makes me so excited for doing what I'm doing right now, is making my own book and putting it out there. I would like somebody years down the line to think of like the stuff that I do and get this excited, because it was something that kind of changed their life. Some of that, it has to do with like, the kid aspect, like your imagination as a 10-year-old, 12-year-old was still, you thought that these things could be possible one day. Like it was, you were living in everything, every page, every panel, you lived in it. You could relate to it, and that's what I loved about comics. But yeah, so 30 years, guys. I mean, congratulations to Image. I know Image isn't what it used to be, and that is sad to me. And I've talked about that before, but just to go back into history, let's talk about like the first 5 years of Image or whatever, first few years of Image. I mean, it was inspiring work, energy filled, brand new, awesome characters. They will forever, ever have their place in comic book history, and they changed the industry. They absolutely changed the industry for independent books and just in general. Comics would not be the same without that notch on the history belt that was Image Comics. 1992, launching the books that they launched, regardless of all the blemishes and the issues that people had with early Image books coming out late, maybe poorly written. You cannot deny the fact that the energy, the excitement, the beautiful art, the quality of paper that they did in those books were just top notch, and they killed it. And I'm glad that they did. And these guys will forever be some of my favorites, and they will continue to be inspiration to me. So go out, find some Image books, find some old Image books, read them, get into them, because it's well worth it, guys. It is. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you like it, please hit the like button, subscribe, share it on social media. And as always, talk to y'all later. Peace.